So here is my Reaper build.
Death walks among you.
Not that Reaper. For Elden Ring, we're going through this heavy-hitting, faith-using, scythe-wielding build right now. Hey, this video is brought to you by you. Let me know in the comments what you think of this build and any other faith builds you would like to see. I'm working through faith builds at the moment, so do let me know. Let's go. The starting class for this build is either the Prophet or the Confessor. Primarily the Confessor because you start out with a little bit more strength. If you want more information about how to play these classes in the beginning, check out my class guides, but I'm going to skip over a lot of that beginner stuff. Go watch those if you're interested. I'll also be showing areas past Stormvale Castle in this video. I'll be avoiding any major spoilers with bosses, things like that, so just be mindful of that. How to play this build. Now, this is a strength and faith kind of hybrid build using the winged scythe as our primary weapon. We are mostly two-handing this weapon to deal devastating damage to enemies and staggering them by two-handing the weapon. The jump attack here is also great to close distance when we are using some incantations to stagger enemies and to close that distance quickly. This weapon does holy and physical damage, so it is a perfect combo for this kind of strength and faith-based build that we're working on here. The real kicker for this weapon is the unique Ash of War Angel Wings, which is a lunging jump attack that shreds enemies and bosses alike. It is a great utility for this build when we're just having the faith or incantation in our left hand and we can drop this Ash of War on enemies. From ranged, I'm using a mixture of different incantations, and one of the strengths of the faith builds and incantations in general is that they can do different damage types. There's much more flexibility here than in magic builds, whereas as magic builds you basically just do magic damage, whereas here in faith builds you can do fire and physical and lightning and holy and all sorts of different damage types with the same incantations. My main spell here is the Lightning Spear, which is also being used in my Spartan build, but it's just a very solid spell all around. It has a high FP cost, sadly, but the damage here is very strong and it can also be charged to deal additional damage. It's a great opener to start the fights. A cheap option that I'm using is the Bestial Sling to just quickly deal damage in a quick kind of cone in front of me. That's like my cheap FP user if I do need to just quickly finish something off and I don't want to use the Scythe, which is a little bit of a slower weapon, which is why the Bestial Sling works out well here. I'm also really liking the Lightning Strike. It's a great AoE spell. If there's a bunch of enemies in front of you and you can pop this and deal damage to all of them, it is perfect. There's some situations as you get into the mid game where this spell just really shines. I've also been tinkering with some of the fire spells and the dragon and beast incantations, but from what I found, a lot of them are too FP hungry to be regular staples into this build, because this build is very stat hungry just to wield the scythe in general and then to cast some of these spells and actually for them to be effective. So it's hard to have a huge pool of FP in order to cast some of these larger incantations like the dragon incantations, but primarily we're using the winged scythe and we're just using these incantations as our secondary, so it doesn't matter too much, and the winged scythe does stack very well with faith, so they go really well together. For our spells, the three staples we are using is the Bestial Sling, which is our cheap FP user. You can get this from Garuk, the Beach Clergyman, after you give him your second death root. I don't want to say too much about it because it's kind of a spoiler, but he is in the Bestial Sanctum in Caelid, but the best way to get there is by the Sending Gate just north of the Third Church of Marika. The Lightning Spear is our primary spell we're using, and this comes from the Dragon Cult prayer book, which you can get from the Knight patrolling immediately south of the Artis Shack Site of Grace in the Lernia of the Lakes area, so you just have to defeat him and he'll drop that book. You can just take it to the turtle or the guy at the Round Table Hold. I can't remember either of their names, but you just take it to them and give them the book and then you can learn the incantations. And the last staple is the Lightning Strike, which you can get from a Scarab in Weeping Peninsula. You can get this very early on, but you're going to need a little bit of faith before you can actually use it, but you can go pick this up in Weeping Peninsula pretty quickly. The rest of our spells or incantations here are really optional. Some sort of healing spell like the Heal or even Urgent Heal or the Bestial Vitality, something like that, just in case you are running out of flasks and you do need a quick heal. It's always good to have something on your bar just for those situations. I kind of like O Flame as a fun flamethrower from your palm. It's a really cool little incantation that you can hit multiple enemies with, and some things that are weak to fire, I like using it for that. And the dragon incantations or anything else you want to play around with here can definitely work in this build, but they're very expensive to use. You're probably only going to get 1 or 2 off with the FP cost, so that's really up to you. For our flasks, we're going half and half with FP and health because we're milling a lot, and so we're going to need some of that health back, but we're using incantations a lot as well, so we're about half and half with our flasks. And then you've also got the heals that you can use if you do run out of healing flasks via the heal or urgent heal. For your attributes for this build, as mentioned, it is very stat hungry, and primarily for this build you're going to need at least like 27 faith so that you can wield the Godslayer's seal, which we're using, as well as be able to use the scythe and some of these higher level spells. Being the scythe scythe needs 16 strength and 16 dex. You're going to have to put points into them just to be able to wield this scythe comfortably. And then other than that, the rest of your points really going into mine to increase our FP so that we can cast some of these spells. And then you're going to want a couple of points into vigor and endurance for that HP and stamina, just so you can fight in the melee range and be able to use a lot of melee attacks before running out of stamina. And I'm alleviating some of that HP and stamina pressure by using one of the talismans, which we'll talk about shortly. But for the most part, you're going to use a lot of stats in this build, and it's going to take a little bit to come together, but that's why it's a mid-game build. So for our gear, we're using the winged scythe, and this comes from the Tombswood Ruins in Whipping Peninsula. Again, this is very close to the lightning strike. You can go and grab this very quickly, but you'll just need a little bit of time before you can actually use it. We're using the Godslayer's seal, which you can get in Stormvale Castle by unlocking one of the Stone Sword key areas, and you'll be able to get the seal from there. I'm using the Erd Tree's Favor to give me extra HP, stamina, and equip load. This comes from just near the Stranded Graveyard, which is that first site of grace you'll come across. There's that imp statue there. You'll need to put a Stoneswood key there, and you can go down in this area and get this talisman. And I'm using this to give me the HP, stamina, and equip load, so I don't have to put those points into vigor and endurance. And it's just a really solid talisman for most builds, really, that are going to use a lot of HP and stamina. I'm also using the Cerulean Amber Medallion for the same reason, to give me more FP so that I don't have to put too many points into that region, so I can cast more spells. And I'm using the Faithful's Canvas Talisman, which raises the potency of incantations so that my incantations do a little bit more damage. I'm wearing the Royal Remains armor, and we're not using a shield at all with this build, so we can wear heavier armor like this, and this armor just kind of completes this Reaper look, really. This armor is a little bit of a spoiler as where does it come from, but it comes from the Round Table Hold, and that's all I'll really say. If you want to look it up yourself and find that out, that's up to you, but I want to try and keep spoilers out of this video for the most part. Some tips for playing this build is the main way that you avoid taking damage is by dodging with those invincibility frames, and as we're not using a shield at all, that can be a difficult learning curve, especially for some of the tougher bosses. But in some scenarios, you also want to find that balance where you can actually be hyper aggressive with the winged scythe, because it does stagger a lot of enemies, especially with angel wings. So in some situations where you might be more of a passive kind of player, this is a very aggressive build. You want to put that pressure on and dodge the attacks that they do and keep staggering them to prevent them from actually getting attacks off. In the same vein, there is a lot of solid ranged options with this build with the lightning spells that we're using. So occasionally in some boss fights that are very deadly to be in melee range, you can just use the spirit summons and cast things like lightning spear and bestial sling and just finish them off in range without really having to get too close, and the spirit summons will kind of take that aggro from you in some of those scenarios. And never be afraid to use the spirit summons or upgrade them. I think they're valuable to have in practically every boss fight, and it's a core mechanic to the game, and that you should absolutely leverage and upgrade them when you do see fit. You can also equip a shield with this build if you absolutely want to. There is some scenarios where I actually did pull out a shield because enemies were too aggressive and I couldn't dodge the attacks, and it's better to block and then guard counter. And I was doing this on stream actually with this build, and that's really up to you. You can just equip one, maybe change the armor you're wearing so you're not going into that heavy load, and use that kind of style of play. But let me know what other builds you would like to see. I'm working on some strength and some more faith stuff, so do let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.